Hey everybody, welcome back to Sounds Like a Drum, a Cadence independent media production. If you're just joining us, we talk about tuning and tone and hacks and myth busting and gaff tape and things like that here. And today is a special day for me because I brought my brand new Baritone Snare drum, or Snom, or floor tom snare, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to talk about all things this today. Alright, so this is interesting for me because the impetus of getting this made for me was actually because so many people were asking about them on the channel, and it actually wasn't something that I was that familiar with. I knew that they existed, and I had also seen people using field drums and sort of like old marching drums in their kits, Chris, Dave, different people, to get an alternative snare sound that wasn't really a snare drum, or not exactly anyway. And after checking out some guys that use them a lot, I got kind of psyched about it, and so kind of went down this rabbit hole, and this is going to be super fun. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario, for helping us out. I'm doing Fire Grain Rebound Acorn 5As today, which go great with this drum because there's a little mass, a little weight there, and we want to move a lot of air with a drum this size. So let's start out with what this is. My friend Ishmael at Maelo Drums made this for me. And this is a maple drum. It is 11 inches deep, 14 inches in diameter, 8 lugs on both sides. It has a trick throw-off on it, 3 legs like a floor tom. And it also has hybrid edges, so the top is rounded over sort of a baseball bat kind of vibe, and the bottom is a normal sort of inner 45 with a slight round over on the outside. I asked for this because I wanted to get as much head contact on the top as possible to promote low end and tone, and then get good snare response on the bottom. It has sort of average snare beds. They're not super wide, they're not super narrow, they're not super deep. So I can use a wide variety of snare wires on this. Currently it has 20-strand blasters, Pure Sounds on there right now, which are pretty much my favorite right now. I go between those and the Custom Pros. So before I talk your ear off about it, let's find out what this thing sounds like at the tuning we're starting out with today. So this is kind of the sound that I associate with this kind of drum when I've seen people doing this sort of thing. Also, if I just see somebody using maybe like an 8-inch deep kind of standard snare drum, but going for a deep sound. Now, there are some specific things that I've discovered in the short time that I've had this that really contribute to getting a good sound out of it easily for the kind of idea in my head and that I've heard people do with this kind of drum. Head choice, incredibly important. The first thing I did was try out a bunch of batter heads on it. I kind of stick with 3mm snare sides all the time. They're working good on this drum too. But the batter head choice is a night and day kind of thing. I tried some standard snare heads, some coated 1-ply, center dot, different things. And I was having a hard time getting the kind of girth and fatness out of the drum that I was kind of expecting to get. When I switched to a hydraulic head, that was getting me closer, but there was still something a little not quite what I was after. And then I threw this black chrome on, which is a 2-ply, not coated, and the plies are not the same thickness, but it is overall kind of a beefy head, but not so beefy as to choke the drum, and this one made me super happy. In thinking about a low-tuned drum, there's a wide range of what low-tuned is. to different people's ears. But I did notice that using some kind of muffling on top also helped to promote this kind of fatness and a certain kind of sustain that you need in order to get an elongated tone out of the snare wires. So I landed on putting an E-ring on it as well, which when I was gigging with it the other day, I actually taped down to the drum just to make sure it wasn't going to go anywhere, because I was having fun and getting a little out of control. But overall, I see 2-ply heads, coated or not, but just like standard 2-ply heads are going to be my go-to for this drum. If I want to use it in a higher tuning, I would go to a standard snare head, and it would be treated in general more like a normal snare drum. But for this specific thing that's almost like an effect, this is where it's at. And then at the very least, a bunch of tape probably, if not an E-ring or a moon gels, something to really get the low end happening. Now let's talk about the snare side head. I tried out a lot of tensions on it. Again, this was a learning experience for me. It's only been a couple of weeks. And I noticed right away that it preferred a fairly tight snare side head. And this wasn't entirely surprising to me, because we need to get sensitivity at a pretty serious distance from the batter head. So I have it tensioned up the way I would for like a 5x14 snare, where I want kind of the quick sound. The thing that this does is it really makes the batter head super pitchy, and that is just because it's reflecting a lot of tone through that head. Now, we want all of that to get a girthy snare sound in the center. It's going to mean, though, that the rim shot sound can be a little bit pitchy. It can also mean that the tom sound with the wires off is going to be a pretty clear note. So if you're going to experiment with this kind of drum or this kind of tuning in general, mess around with the snare side a lot to find the tuning that makes the top head have a good snare sound, but also make it functional for if you want to do other things with the drum in the context of you're playing with the wires turned off. We've got this tuning we're happy with, it's working for us. The next thing we can talk about is spatially. Where in the kit is this thing going to live? If it's a recording session, I lucked out. The builder put the legs on the opposite side where I would want from the wires, a little bit closer together, so it's actually easy to get it in a normal snare position just by turning the far legs this way a little bit, so it can actually sit here and just kind of act like a normal drum. If I'm doing a live situation, chances are this is going to be in some kind of auxiliary position, and I'm going to have a normal snare drum in front of me tuned in sort of a normal snare drum range. So the immediate options for a drum on legs are to go to the left of the hi-hat or to go in the first floor tom position. Where it lives is going to influence when and how I'm going to use it. For instance, having it to my right is going to make it a little bit awkward for normal beats with the hi-hat. Having it to my left is going to mean that it's not really going to be easy to integrate into fills that are sort of associated over here if I'm using the ride cymbal or something like that. So here are a couple of things that I just sort of was experimenting with today that are specific to putting it over here or over there. So as you can see, like putting it over here makes it sort of like a fill-oriented thing for me, and putting it over here makes it more of like a beat-oriented thing. You can do whatever you want. You could even put it on a snare stand in rack position. I've seen videos of several people putting sort of a field drum in that position. And it is only 14 inches, so you can put it on a standard snare stand. It's just going to be hard to get it low enough in front of you for the normal position if you're going to do that, because it is so deep. But if you were going to use it as a rack or something like that, it'd be no problem. Now, what is the tuning range of a drum this size? We've talked a lot about how any size drum can do a lot of different things. This drum, I've tuned it up high, I've tuned it down low, I've tuned it down really, really low. And I've noticed that a low to mid range, which is where we started, makes me pretty happy. It's sort of higher than I would normally tune like a 14-inch floor tom for pop and rock and things like that. But you can tune it down there. I will just say up front that I think a lot of people, when they're checking these out, and certainly when I saw one in a store before I got this, they were tuning it very, very low and expecting it to have like a fat snare sound. And it does do that, especially in microphones. But the acoustic experience right here of having the batter tuned very, very low is a little wild and crazy. And there's a lot of racket from the wires because you're giving a lot of information to the snare wires with all of the different lugs tuned that low that aren't going to be quite the exact same pitch. There's a lot of flap from the head, which is going to make them behave super crazy. But it's also a rad sound. It's a cool effect. And I've definitely heard people use it as an effect or as a thing that sounds almost like there's distortion on it, or it's like a normal drum that's been pitch shifted digitally, which is super cool. Just know that some of these things are going to sound really crazy in front of you. And if you put a mic on them, they're actually going to sound usable and super fun. Now, on the other hand, what if we say to ourselves, we want to put it in kind of a normal snare range, which is up quite a ways, and then sort of benefit from how much air is inside of this? I haven't changed the snare side in any of these demonstrations, by the way. It's been in one spot, and if I was chasing a certain sound, I might make some adjustments there to modify the interaction between the heads, but this is just going for a couple of different pitches. I'm going to boost it up now, and you'll see it totally works. It's got some extra kind of fatness to it because of how much air is in this drum and how much distance there is between the heads. So let's see what it sounds like. So that sounds pretty good. I would probably, if I was going to do this, switch out for a normal kind of standard snare head, as I said earlier, like a center dot or a G12 or something like that, to accentuate the normality of the snare sound. You know, using uncoated 2-ply, you're always going to have a little bit of that kind of sound in there, which if you're after that, that's great. But there's a lot of options, and especially in this range, you could try other heads that are meant to get a normal snare sound. This also brings us to another kind of option for this. If you find yourself going between drum set stuff and also pit orchestra kinds of things where you need like a field drum sound, this will totally do that. We threw a Strata on there the other day, went for kind of a classical sound. You could do different wires and things like that too, but that thing of a big drum kind of pitched up, it nails it. It sounds awesome. Now, one thing we immediately discovered when we were using this at low to very low pitches is that smashing it in the middle without catching the rim, it doesn't actually get you as much low end as if you just sort of let the stick fall into it in a comfortable kind of way. It's lower volume, and it's also going to project differently because a lot of the volume is in a lower register, but that's where the sweet spot is for it. So it's worth noting that really smashing it, you can choke it out, you can lose some of that warmth. Live, you could pitch it up a little bit more to alleviate some of that and still get really aggressive with it. In the studio, just backing off a little bit and letting the mics do the work will really get the character out of the drum that you're looking for. Now, what's another thing to talk about here that's super important? The tension of the snare wires. When you're dealing with a high-tuned drum, you can adjust the wires a lot. With a drum tuned this low, there's definitely a sweet spot, and it is on the looser side of things. It's not flapping in the wind, but you will discover that when the batter head is moving this much physically, not just the air, but when it's actually moving that much, you can get some really bizarro kind of crunky sounds coming out of the bottom head if the wires are too tight. It's not even that they're really choking the drum, though they are a little bit, but we are after a broad sound, and that means that we need those things to be able to ring for a little while. So having the tension just like kind of as loose as you can stand it, but where they're still touching the whole time and not actually flapping away, that's kind of where you want it at. And it takes some experimentation. Every drum is different. Every set of wires is different. We definitely found out right away that you don't need wide wires. Like sometimes when people talk about deep drums, they think you need more wires to get sensitivity. That's absolutely not true. And with this low tuning, I would probably say that more wires is going to increase the risk of choking it. And you may feel like you're getting more wire sound, but getting it through the tuning and the tension of the wires is going to actually get you a larger sound because there's less mass pressing against that bottom head. Another thing to think about when you're tuning a drum this low, and this goes for really any snare drum, is that the rim shot sound might start to not be as cracky as you might want it to be. And that is just kind of part of the deal with tuning a drum super low. So if you're thinking you're going to want to play rim shots on a drum like this, you may not be able to get away with it at the super duper low tension because it's going to start to be kind of a thwacky sound rather than a crack. And that's not a bad thing, but it's not going to be quite the same thing as you might be imagining you would get at a super low tuning. So, you know, in the single hits, you saw like I did some rim shots. You can hear kind of what's going on there. And if you're into it, great. If you're not, then just aim for the center and don't worry about it. Also, this is a great time to mention that there's going to be a bunch of extra footage of this drum on the Patreon shortly that will also include some post-production and some effect and some mixing and things like that to show different things that it can do depending on what you do after you've recorded it. And that's going to be fun for me too, because I have no idea what that's going to sound like yet. But we're going to cook that up and see what it is. And that should be super exciting and give you some ideas about what to chase, even with a regular snare drum in terms of tuning, but especially if you're going after something like this. All right, everybody, thanks again for watching so much. We really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun checking out this drum and showing it to you today. Thanks again to our presenting sponsor, ProMark by D'Addario. And please like, comment, and subscribe to the channel and hit that little notification bell down there, so that you find out about anything that we're posting. Even if you don't get a notification, they are coming up at 12:30 Eastern Time every Tuesday. And please check out the Patreon too, because we're super excited about it. We're having a lot of fun over there as well. And please let us know if you know anything about these drums and if you have any tips for us, if any of our tips were helpful for you, what you're using them for. I know there's a lot of them coming out that are kind of in an affordable range, so I feel like we're going to see a lot more of them on the scene. And yeah, let us know and we'll talk to you soon.